Good morning, everyone. I've been saying this all week, but happy Climate Week, New York City. Great to be with you all. I am so excited for this program today. Before I begin, I'm Dani Nierenberg. I am co-founder and president of Food Tank. We are a research and advocacy organization really devoted to telling stories of hope and success in food and agriculture systems across the globe. And I'm just really thrilled to have this summit on food and agriculture as a key solution to the climate crisis. It's so nice to see food and agriculture really centered in climate conversations. It took a long time to get here, and so I'm thrilled about that. I want to set the stage for you today and just share some statistics and some information. So unfortunately right now, more than 730 million people face hunger in the world, and about 2.8 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. Biodiversity is disappearing, droughts are increasing in their severity. If the climate crisis worsens, so will other crises. But it doesn't have to be this way, and that's the really good news, and that's the point we've been trying to drive home all week. There are food producers on land and water who are feeding their communities while healing soils and waters and improving biodiversity. There are programs and initiatives helping bring our attention back to climate-resilient, nutritious, and delicious crop varieties that have been overlooked for far too long. And there are voices, young and old alike, who are demanding more nourishing and a more nourishing and equitable future for our food and agriculture systems, and really for all of us. We have so many solutions in front of us. I'm an optimist. I always feel hope. I couldn't do this job if I didn't feel hope. And so I have to figure out, and this is a question for you all, how do we balance hope and urgency? Because there's a lot of urgency to do things quickly and solve the problems that are facing us, and to really scale solutions up and out in different ways, because we just don't have time to waste anymore. I don't want to come back to Climate Week next year and have these same conversations. I want us to make the progress that's needed. So, we need to ensure that global policymakers are putting, again, food and agriculture front and center. And that's why the discussions we're having today are so important. And I want to say how thrilled and honored and delighted I am to be partnering with the World Food Program USA. They are just incredible partners. Please give them a round of applause. They're just amazing. And I especially want to thank Barron, Segar, Abigail Sealer, and Tula Athos from WFP USA. They're amazing. Give them a round of applause, please. And I want to acknowledge the space that we're in. It's not only Climate Week, it's the 100th anniversary of WNYC. Please give them a round of applause. Ryan, James, and Ricardo, who are behind the scenes, are making all of the productions we've done this week flawless. I want to thank our security guard, Kareem, who's just friendly and keeping everything in order. Please give them a round of applause. I want to thank the team at Great Performances, including Liz Newmark, Janelle Cruikshank, and Laura Traeger, for putting together the delicious menu. Did you enjoy breakfast? Yes. Round of applause for them. So I need to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way, and then we'll dive right in. The discussions you're going to hear today are very, very fast-paced and dynamic, and I hope if I have to cut someone off, which I will, it usually happens, I hope you will forgive me later. We just want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk and get into the issues that we need to. We don't have breaks built in, so leave when you need to for fresh air or water or whatever else. I also hope that you'll join the conversation by using the hashtag ClimateWeekNYC. You can also reach out to me directly with criticisms, suggestions, critiques, whatever you want, at Danielle at foodtank.com. My phone is over there. I'll be checking it regularly throughout the program. So now I'm really so honored to introduce our first speaker, Barron Segar, the president and CEO of the World Food Program USA. Round of applause for Barron, please.
A big round of applause for him.
So I'm wondering if you can start by telling us a little bit about World Food Program USA and how you support the wider work of the World Food Program.
Well, first also, I want to give a big thank you to my team as well, who has worked so tirelessly on this effort, and a lot of our friends I see in the audience, and our global ambassador, Andrew Zimmer, backstage,
Yep.
who better be watching as I speak. So the World Food Program USA, we are based in Washington, D.C., and we exist because we vision a world without hunger. And our priority area is working really collaboratively with the UN World Food Program,
Yep.
or to work with our policy makers to make sure that everybody knows that food is a basic right. Working with the private sector, I see my friend C.D. Glenn in the audience. Working with our communications team to make
Yeah.
sure that we are really important, amplifying the voices of those who really need our help. And as most of you know, the UN World Food Program, the largest humanitarian organization in the world fighting global hunger, the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, by the way, in 2020, and in 120 countries, serving about 150 million people just in 1 year.
It's amazing. It's amazing. That work is incredible. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about how the World Food Program USA looks at the climate crisis. It's definitely a driver, we all know, of the hunger crisis.
I think it surprises a lot of people when we say that there's enough food in the world to feed everybody. The challenge that we have is that there's not access and there's not availability.
Right.
So, and why is that? That's because of, when it rains hard. When it's hot, it's hotter for longer.
Right.
And so it is disrupting our ability to not only deliver food, but also to make sure that smallholder farmers are equipped with different types of products and seeds and fertilizers. So, a couple of things that we're doing, by the way, to address this. I travel to the field quite a bit, and we're seeing an expanded use of hydroponics. We're seeing a lot of farm to market. When I talk to smallholder farmers, they talk a lot about post-harvest loss.
Mm-hmm.
So we're harvesting the food, but then it gets lost. It gets lost because there's not a place to store it. It's hot. The rodents get into it, and so we're developing technologies around making sure that food can stay longer before it's transported. And the last thing I'll say is we're also interrupting the climate crisis because we're partnering with organizations like Google who are helping us with weather forecasting.
Right.
I mean, imagine being a smallholder farmer and you don't have access to the weather. I guarantee you that we've all checked the weather today in New York City. By the way, it is going to rain. But most smallholder farmers don't have access to that. Also, early warning systems.
Yeah.
When there's really bad weather on the way, it allows farmers to plan much better.
It really does. And those innovations and technologies are growing and expanding, but they're not always, as you pointed out, they're not always reaching the people who need them the most. Can you talk about how the World Food Program helps sort of infiltrate these communities and make sure they get that information?
Yeah, so I think one thing about the World Food Program, the UN World Food Program, we're invited in by countries to work.
Yeah.
So we don't go in and say, hey, we're here, how can we help? It gives us a seat with government. It gives us a seat to help work with leaders within government and other NGOs to make sure that hunger is made a priority. And by the way, not just food, but think about infrastructure. Think about roads. Think about taking products from point A to point B to point C into the marketplace. And then, we have thousands of implementing partners. Mm-hmm. So again, when you think about the UN World Food Program, it's locally community led.
Yep.
And we're supporting it. Every country, by the way, also has a different country plan. The needs are different wherever you go. But I think it's preparing. Maybe one quick example I would give you, because we are, through the generosity of the private sector and our donors of the World Food Program USA and the government of Barbados, we're building an emergency supply warehouse, and it's going to serve the Caribbean. And it's going to be built differently. It's going to have runways and it's access to ports. And so what I would say is pre-preparedness and anticipating what climate is going to bring is a very important component of our work.
It really is, and it's one thing that has impressed me throughout, knowing you and the organization. One thing that I also think is important that you do is you've really focused on partnerships and collaboration, whether it's with government, you mentioned the private sector. What do those private sector relationships look like?
So I would say very humbly, we have really grown with the World Food Program USA. When I started in 2020, we were raising $18 million a year in the private sector, and last year we were at $140 million.
Wow.
It's been staggering, and I say that in a very humbling approach, that it's been individuals, companies, faith-based organizations, foundations, NGOs like Lions Club, have really rallied. I think that food has risen to the top of the list, the priority list.
Finally.
And companies, by the way, are also hearing from their employees that, hey, this is important to us. So I would, and then our approach with companies, and I give Executive Director Cindy McCain of the UN World Food Program a lot of thanks, because there's a culture at the UN World Food Program that I think is very unique and very different from some other organizations, and that there is a pro-business attitude, and that we know that, and I would speak for most UN organizations, they need help from the private sector. And most importantly, around those issues, those challenges that they can't solve on their own. So when you talk about the private sector, and we'll maybe use the corporate sector as an example, it's really a combination of funding, but also equally importantly is, what can we do to solve hunger? What is the corporate expertise that we can use, whether it's working with a PepsiCo or working with a Cargill or working with a Google, or thinking even about a UPS, who's one of our key sponsors. They come in and look at our supply chain and make recommendations for efficiency.
It just makes sense to have that expertise and use it in a way that's effective for the global South and folks around the world. You mentioned starting in 2020 in your position. That must have been so daunting. Can you reflect on the pandemic and how hunger increased and how the World Food Program of the United Nations and World Food Program USA responded?
I think that it was an amazing launching point, I think, for the global organization. Again, when I refer to the World Food Program USA and the UN World Food Program, we really act as one organization. I would say that a lot of our success has been because of our partnership with the UN World Food Program, with my colleagues Virginia and Rania and others that are doing such an amazing job working with us. And so, we do a lot of policy work at the World Food Program USA. We do staff delegations. We take Republicans and Democrats to the field to show them our work so that they can come back and draft and be supportive of legislation from the U.S. government. And then one of the really exciting things that we launched and talked about quite extensively this week was how technology is going to help us with the weather forecasting. That's relatively new. But when you think about climate and then even how we work with Cargill around our work supporting smallholder farmers. And keep in mind, by the way, that more than 50% of our smallholder farmers are female. And it's been an exciting, honestly, it's been a very exciting 5 years. I can't explain it in any other way than saying that, like you, I feel a great sense of responsibility. I feel a great sense that a lot of people are depending on us to get it right. And when I go to the field, I get to get on a plane and come home. And I know that my brothers and sisters are still there. And so even though I started at the beginning of COVID, our work with the UN World Food Program around our policy work, our private sector work, just this real spirit in the U.S. around helping others, it really emerged, by the way. I think that, COVID woke a lot of people up.
It did.
That we're put on this earth and we have a limited period of time. We're seeing suffering here. But I would tell you that in the U.S., that everybody thought globally.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, the spirit of really helping others and seeing the entrepreneurism on the ground, seeing how the private sector is working with you, seeing how you get bipartisan support, which is amazing in these political times. And one of the core pillars of WFP USA is optimism.
Yes.
And I want to end on that because I think, you know, during this week at Climate Week and the lead up to COP and all of the other things that are going on in the world, there's a tendency to get a little bit overwhelmed. People are exhausted.
I do that when I go home.
But how do you keep that optimism alive and then that spirit of hopefulness?
It's incredibly easy to be optimistic because even though a lot of the world is really hurting right now, I'm optimistic because I remember the people that I met.
Yeah.
I remember meeting Lorenzo in Central America, 18-year-old kid who decided not to migrate to the U.S. Because through the World Food Program and its partners, we were providing his family with farming, with jobs, with income, and I will never forget, you know, this young man saying that a lot of his friends had migrated to the U.S., but because of the World Food Program and its partners, he's staying here with his family. I remember Matea, who I met in Kenya, and she's a 70-year-old smallholder farmer. And by the way, it was about 100 degrees. She's out in the rice field. And I asked her what the World Food Program meant to her. And she said, you know, it's not only, by the way, she didn't use the word, you've helped us, you've supported us. She said the World Food Program has transformed what we are doing. And I said, wow, we're transforming lives and livelihoods. And then the last one I'll say is my first trip to the field was Central America, and I met Elsie, and a 32-year-old mom, 2 kids. Central America, Honduras had just been hit by 2 successive hurricanes, and the community identified her as somebody in great need. And so she was a recipient of a cash-based card. And basically what this means is that it's, say, $100 a month for a maximum of 4 months, and, you know, allows her to buy food for her and her kids. And she took me to the store with her. And I said, would you mind just telling me, if you didn't have the support of the UN World Food Program, what would life be like?
Right.
And she looked at me and she said, may God help me if I didn't have the support of the UN World Food Program. So I would say that every day that I go home, I think Matea, I think Elsie, I think of Lorenzo, and the responsibility that they have given us to make sure that we're amplifying the message, but also that we're saving and protecting lives. It's an amazing feeling. And again, we couldn't do this work, I have to say, without the support of governments around the world and our private sector, whether you're giving $10 or you're giving much more, it doesn't matter, and using your voice to tell those stories.
What a wonderful way to end. Thank you for that call to action. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you
so much.